So after a short break and a beautiful hour of ceremonies, we're going to take you to the next hour, the third hour of our Connectathon. And we are inviting in our speaker for the next hour, which is Brett deGraf. Brett is going to talk about human superorganism and how the Connectathon cohort at large, for example, the regeneration movement, can form a self-owned and self-governing social graph as a commons or platform and cooperative with today's tools. And that would have large values that can be collectively allocated. Brett, over to you.
Thanks, everyone. It's an honor to be here. That was a beautiful hour. It's hard act to follow. Yeah, so I think a lot of what I want to talk about has a very aligned vision with what what everyone here is here for, I think, but also what was just expressed. I'm a practitioner, and sorry, am I being heard? Okay. Yeah, so I want to talk about kind of a big vision, but also one that I think is actionable, and I know everyone here wants to start claiming our agency, so to speak. So I'll share, I'll talk through a deck, and I have a little bit of a demo. So if I can just do a screen share now. Hopefully this will all work. And I'm going to move this over here so I can see you all. Okay. Everybody's seeing everything correctly. So I think everybody probably knows the notion of superorganisms. Murmurations, bird murmurations are a good example of a collective behavior that's driven by individual behaviors, and you get this beautiful complexity that comes out of no complexity at all in terms of what each individual has to do in terms of interacting with their neighbors. Schools of fish, corals, termite nests, ants. There's a notion called Stigmergy, which is kind of an odd technical term, but it's very powerful. The ants leave pheromones wherever they are encountering good food, and other ants notice those pheromones. They add more, and those become pathways to the food, and they're super efficient for solving the shortest path to the food. An interesting analogy in neuroscience is neural pathways, right? When we experience burns in new synapses and neural pathways, and those get reinforced because we tend to use them. So that's a big part of what I want to talk about today, is this notion of networks and neural networks and pathways among people, where people are neurons. So what human superorganisms exist out there? Some current examples are the internet, of course. Wikipedia is a good example of Stigmergy, where if I make a new page, that's a marker that someone else might notice, and then they'll start, oh, I'm interested in that, or I know about that subject, so I'm going to add more. So that's a very simple thing, where my behavior drives other people's behavior into something that's much bigger than all of us. Twitter and Facebook are obviously, sort of examples of superorganisms. Open source software. Litter is an example of Stigmergy. If I throw a piece of litter down, it might cause behavior by other people to pick it up, but if there's enough of it, they'll just start littering themselves. So these forces are really simple and powerful in lots of different ways. One of my observations is, why aren't we better at superorganisms, at human superorganisms? Twitter and Facebook are not great examples of success in that space. and we're much smarter than ants. We have much greater facility to make markers and to create algorithms that use those markers to do things that are beyond us in terms of what our current capabilities are. And so that's a lot of what drives me. Is I think we are at a place where we can we are on the verge of moving to new levels of human superorganizing. And it's all about connecting and what we do with those connections. So who is we? I sort of think of we as, in terms of our collective cohort, the Connectathon, other communities that I'm part of, is I think of the regeneration movement as a useful container for what I talk about when I talk about we and what we can do together. We're numerous. I feel like we have very little agency to manifest the world that I know is possible and that I think we all want. And that's largely because we're in our operating system, if you will, the capitalism, nation states, oligarchy, etc. They're hindering us from actually acting with the agency that we really should have, given the size of our community. Our cohort is tens or hundreds of millions, if not larger. And we're well into the meta crisis, and we don't have a lot of time to do anything to get through this inflection point in humanity. So we have to start acting, we have to rise above, pretty soon. Our current operating system is not going to get us through this inflection point. So in business, there's this notion of the big, hairy, audacious goal. What is it that, with Amazon, it's like every book, instantly delivered, right? Or whatever, the big, hairy, audacious goal for Amazon. My big, hairy, audacious goal is to help manifest an intentional human superorganism, or one or more, where we're actually acting with a new capability for global self-organization at scale. So what's the intention? I don't know. The intention I really like I think captures it the best. There's lots of ways of saying what is our collective intention, and there probably is no one. But for me, Bucky's, a world that works for all is a fairly, concise intention that works for me. So is an intentional superorganism possible? I mean, these are self-organizing things where communication is local. Somebody said, can you do emergence by design? I don't know. I don't have an answer for that, but I kind of believe that it can be guided. It can be aspirational. And we're doing it now. I mean, Connectathon being here today is part of that intention. Is it inevitable? In some ways, I think humanity is realizing that we need to be doing something differently, and that we need to be getting better at global coordination, because we're all trying to solve planetary problems. So maybe it's inevitable, but only if we survive long enough, which is not a given. Okay, so what's not working and why, in terms of what I work on and what's not working and what can be fixed. The connections that we have are either in our brains, like I know you and you know them, and if I want an introduction to them, I may not even know that an introduction would be good unless you just decide, oh, Brad should know Daisy, right? So there's a lot of human connections that are in our brains that if we can move them into a form that can be shared, we can do a lot more coordination automatically without having to have intermediary required actions. And those connections The ones, but the digital connections we have, like on a friend on Facebook, a connection on LinkedIn, these are what I call one-bit connections. There is no subtlety in a LinkedIn connection. I don't know, no one can see, people can see I'm connected to this person, but why? What do I, what do I respect them? Do they respect me? Is it symmetrical? What domain of expertise do I respect them in? So that's very, very low subtlety. And so that's one problem, is it's just there's no richness in those connections. Those I sort of call those Stigmergy markers, connecting to each other. They're examples of Stigmergy markers. Oh, well, actually, Stigmergy markers are like, I like this piece of content, or I commented on that. So those and those, the algorithms that utilize these connections and these markers, they all and drive our collective behavior, like like conspiracy theories and election distortion on Facebook. They're owned by Facebook, LinkedIn. They're owned by corporations who are only driven by profit. So we have these connections that are not very rich, and they're controlled by for-profit companies that don't have a real any kind of mission to serve what we want. So that's the core problem that I think is solvable right now, and that's part of what's driving what I'm working on. So a necessary condition to rise above our current state is dramatically new levels of connection. There's the neural analogy I mentioned earlier of we in that analogy, we are the neurons, and we have these minimal one-bit connections that are not serving us well. And so what networked autonomous organisms is about is essentially making those synapses more accessible, enriching them, and with what we already know about each other, and evolving how we use them. So this is a diagram of the general concept. A social graph is, I'm not talking about a social network like Facebook. So first of all, this is not about being a Facebook replacement or a Facebook wannabe. It's about taking ownership of the connections between us and how those are stored as data, and taking ownership of it. So the social graph is that top circle. Trust networks, which I'll talk about in a bit, are really basically where edges in these networks can be thought of as I trust this person in this domain. I trust my daughter to walk the dog, but I don't trust her to fly an airplane, right? I trust this person in finance. I trust that person in permaculture. So those become very rich, especially around collective decision-making and collective action. The platform co-op idea is, it's like any cooperative, it's owned by its members. And the platform part of it is, generally it means that it's a software platform that can be used broadly across the internet. So an Uber that is owned by the drivers and the riders is a good example of a platform cooperative. But it does exist, the drivers co-op in New York, but it hasn't scaled yet. And the idea about this is that the social graph is embedded with trust. It's instantiated as a platform cooperative, and it is a commons that we can all own and share in the value of. And the DAO is the decentralized autonomous organizations. I'm assuming people know a little bit about those. I can talk more about that, but that's just kind of the general vision, is to kind of knit those together into something that can actually be functional and actually in short time. So we're sort of thinking of it as a network cooperative. It's a pattern for empowering communities and movements like Connectathon, the climate movement, etc. It's something's in my way here. Let me just get this out of the way. It's a shared user community, so apps can be developed on top of it. And it's a substrate for innovation, especially around governance. Governance is a key element of a lot of this. Is how do we govern ourselves at scale if we're a large global community? Let's see here. Okay. and it's a collective resource that has a lot of shared value. A little bit of my background. In the last millennium, I had a 20-year career in computer graphics, and just kind of got out of that. This millennium, I've been more focused on social software. In 2005, I did what I think is the first instance of what's now called liquid democracy. It's the idea of using these social graphs as collective decision-making tools. The edges in these graphs can function as delegation or proxy. So I can say, I delegate to this person in this domain, I delegate to that person in that domain, and writ large, you can actually make large collective decisions where only a few people who are knowledgeable can represent the other people who don't have time to do the research, don't feel knowledgeable enough to express a good decision. So it's very powerful, and it's going to revolution. It's being used more and more, and I think we're going to see a lot of large scale use of it. So we get this continuous representation. Network centrality is how connected one node is in the network, and that's a good proxy for or measure of authoritativeness. If someone is highly connected in a network of oceans people, then maybe they have a lot of authoritativeness on the subject of oceans. So if retweets were a delegation, so this is an example of a bunch of people on Twitter who are accounts on Twitter that talk about cooperatives. And I'll share this this link here. Well, actually, maybe I can. Oh, are you all seeing this? Yeah, I guess you are. Okay, yeah. So this is that network. When I mouse over any one of these accounts, what I'm seeing is which of the other accounts retweeted this person, and which ones they retweeted. So if you think of a retweet as a marker for respect or trust, then you can imagine how this is kind of like a trust network of people who talk about cooperatives. So that's kind of the best example I can give you there. Let's see. I'm working two screens here, so hopefully I'm not being too uncoordinated. Okay, so yeah, so all right. So networks of trust, they're super powerful. That's what that paper on smartocracy and the collective decision making is about. And they have an inherent capacity for new kinds of making decisions. I started a company to take advantage of that, using it to distill signal out of the noise of Twitter. But the last 2 years, I've quit my day job, and I decided to focus on societal scale decisioning using this technology. So that's what NewNet is my organization, and the Now concept is kind of our main focus. So back to this, the core idea, and this is directly relates to Connectathon, to the Kodu app. And so I just want to talk briefly about the core concept is a social graph that grows by invitation. So if you think about all the great people that you know and you invite them, what you're doing is you're creating edges in a social graph from you to them that provides a chain of accountability. Every person who joins the graph is accountable to the person that invited them, and that cascades back to the original founders. So that's the core concept, is to grow this graph, so an actual self-owned database of people and connections that grows by invitation. And it's cooperatively owned and governed, and it's a commons, where we're in a commons, you have like a pasture, and you have a bunch of shepherds, and they share the pasture, right? Well, in this case, the shared resource is the users, right? So it's a little bit, it's kind of an interesting kind of commons where, the resource is the community. I don't have time to talk through all of Ostrom's 8 rules for the commons, but these trust networks solve all 8 of them, or they at least address all 8 of her. She got the Nobel Prize for these rules, and this is core to humanity's survival in the planet is our commons, and if we don't get good at using it correctly, then, well, we haven't been good at it, and that's why we're here where we are today. This concept has a lot of uses. So, resource allocation, for instance, there's a lot of innovation going on, especially in the Web3 space, around, hey, we're interested in this domain of work, permaculture, whatever. We're going to raise it. We're going to raise a token for permaculture, and we're going to use this governance mechanism to decide, to take requests for proposals on what projects want to get funded, and we're going to fund them. So innovation funds, I think, are about to explode, or they are exploding, as a mechanism for taking a lot of the money that's on the sidelines in how do we solve our global problems. There's a lot of money out there, and this kind of approach of decentralized networked decision making is a really efficient way to figure out what can we do, how much will it cost, who's best to do it, and make sure the money gets there as efficiently as possible. Sense making is a core to getting to knowing what to do and how to get through this time, and we're very bad at it. Our epistemic commons has been destroyed by Facebook and corporate media, and so we have to get really good at sense making, and this is one mechanism for doing that. Global coordination and collaboration is, as I said, these kind of networks are really good. That's basically the superorganism concept, is like, how do we do things at scale that don't require massive centralized communication? It's sort of what I call extreme decision making, making decisions fast, high scale, highly trusted, because everyone can see the algorithms that are being used for taking my input and your input and how that ended up being a result, and also being very agile. The concept of this social graph as a shared commons is really that it's anyone who has an app that they want to develop that utilizes it, as long as it aligns with the values of the owners, ourselves, can write their own app and not have to worry about where they're going to get their user community, because it's an already existing user community. So someone could write a new Instagram that is better than Instagram and doesn't have ads and that raises money for good things, and they don't have to worry about where they're going to get their user community from. I talked a little bit about platform co-ops and DAOs. I think this is a super actionable thing right now. I mean, the mechanisms for forming these things are not hard. There are resources to get the legal support and necessary legal support to do it. A lot of it is about governance and how we evolve beyond the traditional cooperative governance of, oh, we have a board and we follow these bylaws. You have to do that. But I think this network cooperative concept, where there is the board is the network, has real power. Virtual nations. Virtual nations was kind of the original inspiration for my current work. Is the idea that this large regeneration-oriented cohort is as big as the Catholic Church. Why aren't we as powerful as the Catholic Church? Why don't we have the global power of a multinational corporation? And we should. And there's the link here is to the Network State, a book that was just came out that talks about how networks, how the possibility of network-driven states is real today. So it's called the Network State. It doesn't exactly have the same concept. It actually has very little about network governance, which is one of its missing parts. But I think that we actually can be a virtual nation. So why now? This is really actionable now. I mean, when I met Tim and Patrick and saw is it 𝐂𝐭𝐤𝐿, and the global invitation mechanism, there's, it could easily be used to do this to grow a by invitation social graph, and I'm sure that's what's in mind. And so we can actually collaborate on. We have some existing technology as well, and so maybe we can combine efforts. But again, this is actionable right now. There's nothing new required, and it's going to be super impactful. It has lots of composability, and you can, networks can, be self-contained, but they can also overlap and federate. It has a lot of value if you look at how any user community, how they're valued when they're acquired. Slack was bought for $2,000 per user. They had several million users, and the purchase price, if you divide it by the number of users, it was $2,000 per user. I mean, that's not directly attributable, but actually I think it could be even higher. But that's through existing mechanisms like advertising for monetizing that, but that doesn't mean that we don't have the same value in a different way. We need it. It's necessary now. We have to start doing this, or we're not, or things are just going to fall apart. We've been collaborating with the �emerge network, which some of you may know. Thomas Björkman is a Swede as well. Tim knows him. I was invited to the recent meeting in Austin to map the network of users. So I think maybe what I'll do is I'll switch to a quick demo here, and we can let's see here. So hopefully this is everybody still seeing it, I presume. Okay.
All good.
Yeah. Okay. So this is just a little bit of background. I was introduced to Thomas by Daniel Schmachtenberger, some of whom you may know. He writes a lot about the meta crisis. And so I was invited by Thomas okay, so this is I was invited by him to map the attendees of this conference in Austin. So he gave me a list of these people, and a lot of great people. We didn't get everybody, but Jeff Ganung is from and David Sloan Wilson are from the prosocial.world. A lot of really interesting people. Indy Johar, an amazing guy. Lots of really interesting people. And this is harvested from social media. So these connections, I don't know if you can see the ins and outs of the way the particles are going, but these say that it's who's connected to whom in which direction. So you're seeing out of this set, how are the people who are connected to Nathan connected, and then you can navigate around and see the connections of all the connections. So these are all of Daniel Schmachtenberger's connections that we have. We out of the first pass of a couple hundred people, we got 23,000 connections, because each one of them has like 500 or so that we could determine, and they overlap, and then we've since expanded to over 1,000 people as the center points, and we have over 250,000 profiles and 500,000 connections among them. So it's a way of bootstrapping a provisional network. So for instance, in Kodu, if I'm Linda Brewer, we might be able to show Linda Brewer, here's a bunch of people we know, or would you like us to show you who we know, and then you can pick from them who to invite, or to make it easy for you to invite them. So that's kind of the idea, is that one of the key things that we're leveraging is in California, there's a new law called the California Consumer Privacy Act, which mandates that Facebook, LinkedIn, Amazon, all these companies have to allow me to export my data. So we can make it easy for any of you to import your connections, any ones that we don't already have, and we can grow this network very easily and quickly. Just quickly, two things that we use, we built as part of this whole infrastructure. One was about making decisions. So we have a simple collective decision-making service where anyone can any group can make any set of questions they want. In this case, one of the questions for emerge was, well, what do we call this thing we're thinking about in terms of emergence? What is the, how do we describe it to lay people about what we think should emerge, or what we want to emerge? A lot of there's game B has been one of those terms that has been used as like, what's the next game beyond our current game, or the third attractor. Daniel Schmachtenberger uses third attractor to say our current attractors are dystopia, authoritarianism. Isn't there a third attractor that we can manifest that's not those two? And that's so superorganism actually ended up being the winning concept so far, anyway. It's a small sample set, but the idea here is basically you can ask a question, anyone can submit a possible answer, everybody can vote on and do ranked choice voting on any of the answers, and then you can inspect who's made what choices. So for instance, one of them was, if Merge was a political party, what would our platform be? So that's an interesting question, like among ourselves. Not so much as a political party, but if we're envisioning a positive future, what does it look like? What are the aspects of it? How can we just do a bullet list of what that future looks like? It's an interesting exercise, and this is a really simple mechanism for getting kind of alignment around what might otherwise be complex questions of, like, what are our principles, or what is the future we're envisioning? So that's the kind of the decision service. We also have a shared social bookmarking system. I won't go into too much detail here, but the idea here, that's kind of the I don't know if you remember, like, for instance, I can search for I don't know, biomimicry, biodiversity. So it's a way of just when I'm on a web page, if I want to share that web page with my cohort, a subgroup or a subnetwork, I can just, one click, it goes into a bucket that then can be shared and searched. It's kind of, I don't know if you remember Delicious, but it's kind of like Delicious for groups. Or Pinterest is that for pictures, and it's not a new idea, but it's a mechanism that a network like this can actually find useful right away. I won't. I think that's about it for now. But anyway, there's a lot of potential synergy with 𝐂𝐿, so we're really interested in following up on that. Let's just see. Yeah, I'll just say a little bit about the Web3, DAOs, and crypto. There's a lot of innovation going on there. I'm involved in one 8-week-long program, getting familiar with it. It's a tiny subset of humanity, the people who have wallets and want to deal with all the complexity of tokens and all that other stuff. And that's where I think that there's a lot of really interesting opportunity. Like us, how many people have wallets in this cohort? I have one. I don't. Anybody want to raise hands? Somebody count the hands. But anyway, I would guess that not very many of us have wallets, and they're probably more. They probably skew younger. And I do use my wallet, but only on things that I have to have a wallet for. So anyway, I think there's an opportunity here to do the kinds of things that really dovetail well with DAOs. For instance, DAOs are amazing they're going to totally revolutionize how humans self-organize. And the opportunity for Connectathon and the related cohort to kind of prototype decentralized organizations without crypto, right? We don't need crypto to do a lot of those things. I mean, the automated part of it that's part of what you need crypto for, but you can simulate that kind of automation while you and just move to crypto and DAOs when it's a much more widely adopted mechanism. And in some ways, this kind of thing could be the way that you make wallets worth getting. I mean, most of the reason people don't have wallets is there's very little you can do with them that don't require deep knowledge of crypto and tokens and all this other stuff that, you know, even as a technologist, I don't really, you know, it's still baffling to me. About apps, I mean, this is not about what apps are we building. We definitely will be, there will be, you know, the decision service, for instance, and the bookmark that, or the bookmarking system, those are kind of more example apps than anything else. So they're like what we call reference implementations, just to show the possibilities. But if somebody wants to write any app that on top of this infrastructure, we want to make that good, make that easy. So it's more about licensing access to the network, and that's where some of the business models, where some of the value comes in, is that somebody says, I have this app that needs your user community, and here's what it does, and here's how how the community will revenue share in that process. Yeah, that's I didn't really have time to do a good conclusion. So let me just stop sharing and there we go. Hopefully, oh, sorry. That was not intentional. Stop share. Okay. Yeah, I meant to say at the beginning that anybody who wanted to interrupt me could, but you didn't have much chance. So so yeah, that's kind of my what I'm focused on, and I do see a lot of real good synergy with Connectathon. Tim, I see you have a hand raised.
Yeah, sorry, thank you, Brad. It's really interesting. I mean, just speaking for me and probably Patrick and the rest of the team, that love to see where we can take this together. There's probably a lot of interesting content in the chat too, but I think basically to speak of the DAO, the nature of the earth is a DAO. You know, there's no conferences on top-down decisions about if it should rain or where a worm goes. You know, or this nature is self-regulatory. And there's a fantasy among a lot of people that mistake capitalism for as an entire system and not just a hack, that it's somehow is self-regulatory, but it isn't really, because it's got all these gamification things you can program into it. And I think nature has a game of its own, and I think we can learn a lot from biomimicry. But yeah, I think it's really interesting. But the thing I was wondering, because in the beginning you speak about the murmur of, like, the murmurations of birds and fishes, and here we're talking about some very, very simple movements. Oh, I go there, you go here, like super simple mathematical algorithms, I guess you could say, algorithms. And I'm sort of interested in your thoughts on how, and I guess that's what all your presentation was about, how do we take that and move that into this space as complex humans that have to sort of solve complex solutions? I mean, lots of things I'd like to talk about that, but I just wanted to plant that and see what your thoughts are.
Yeah, well, one simple example from my perspective is like the climate movement, right? I mean, it's huge, but it's not coordinated at all. And for instance, like, what if you wanted to get everyone who considers them part of the climate movement to do the same thing today, right? Everybody go out and let air out of one SUV's tires, or whatever, what you couldn't do that today. I mean, you might, somebody with, a Bill McKibben or some big influencer with a large following might say something on Twitter that would get that to happen. But I think that the climate movement could very well be much better, self-organized at scale than it is currently by being able to, collectively decide what should we do today? How do we self-organize, across Extinction Rebellion and Sunrise Movement and 350.org locally, right? I mean, how does that work? So I don't have any like simple answers. I think that was part of my sort of question is like, okay, we have these mechanisms for marking and signaling, but what are the algorithms that drive the behavior we want, right? And it is hard to envision, right? Because it's kind of beyond us right now. What? Oh, yes, Robert.
Yeah, thanks, Brad. That was really a wonderful presentation, and it's really super interesting to see. I just recently saw your chat elaborating with Daniel Smachtenberg about sense making, and also the connections with artificial intelligence. And yeah, super fascinating. I was wondering, you just mentioned how sort of the activist groups, how they can organize. Maybe you've heard of the 3 pillars of activism of Joanna Macy, which, yeah.
I don't, and I know of Joanna Macy, but I wouldn't say that I'm super familiar with those pillars.
Yeah, just very briefly, we see here 3 pillars. One of them is holding actions where all the protest groups are. The other pillar is raising consciousness. And this is where all the thought leaders are. So you should be there too, Brett, or you are there. And then we have the tool building where 𝐂𝐤𝐿 is, for instance, and a lot of other groups. And the situation is that currently all these 3 pillars mostly operate in silos, but they really get momentum and strength when they start working in symbiosis with each other. So if you protest something or protest against something, also come up with a solution and present the tool to implement it. And I think this is where we are flowing into, just as a short reflection. But thanks again.
Yeah. Ariel.
Hi there, Brad and everyone. Thank you so much, Brad, for sharing. That was so inspiring, because every time I watch every person sharing a different part of this, the kind of stuff go off in my head, and the realization that if we do this together, and you wouldn't have been watching what's happening in the chat, but that's what was kind of going on in the chat, where the realization for some of the people were, wow, we didn't even know this existed. And I think once again, the reason for something like Connect-a-thon, and maybe much more of that happening all the time, and us being committed to sharing what we're doing, because it might just be that someone else sitting here has the other part of that, and the other part of that, and the other part of that, because it's not, I mean, what Robert just shared, we have all of these different aspects of what makes it a really fluid whole, and what gives us the possibility to actually have that impact that we desire to be able to have as a kind of citizens, and not just top down telling us what to do, but organizing ourselves and also helping them organize. It's not about, I think, top down so bad, we're so great, but it's about everybody's kind of finding their way in all of this, right? We all, I think every human on this planet wants to live well, and hopefully along with that, we live in a way that all the animals and the plants and everything else also can live well. But I think part of that is just the recognition that we are part of something. And if we start genuinely sharing authentically with what we have, and have these open hearts with, oh, this is just not my thing, but like what you just said, this is what I've got. How can this help with what you've got? And if we come to these spaces like that, I honestly think we're going to be able to do magic together.
Yeah, there's a lot of weaving going on all over, and best practices is a lot of it is just learning from others. I mean, Charles Blass got me involved in this in kernel.community. If you get a chance, check it out. It's mostly Web3 oriented, but it's an amazing collection of people who are, and it's all about learning together and connecting people who have things in common so they can, self-coordinate. So it's a good example of a community that's making that work. Andy.
Yeah, sorry, just a thing that occurred to me there. There was something that Farrell and I were talking about last week, the week before, and it was talking about getting attention, increasing awareness, developing appreciation, and then coming to some sort of accommodation. And that the speaker before Farrell was talking about 3 pillars of whatever, and I just thought these 4 things, you know, that we've got to try and amongst all the noise, get some attention to the people that are. As Farrell was saying, most people are excited by the possibility as much as horrified by the dystopian possibility, right? So you get the attention of people that are concerned. How do you raise awareness around what Farrell just said, which is we are, in a sense, you know, the solution's us, not something else, and then starting to appreciate each other's assets and local challenges again, which is I think what the 𝐂𝐿𝐴𝐻𝐿𝐴 is supposed to be about. But it's then finding that accommodation and that thing that you've been talking about, Brad, the bit that I got excited about, because I know nothing about technology, is this idea that through all sorts of mapping and technology, we can start to really appreciate together and then understand how we move towards accommodating everybody's needs. Yeah. I don't know if that helps, but that's just my thoughts.
Yeah, Charles also shared that notion of smart mobs, and that, which is, I think, a good, and then that's the, what, 15, 20 years old concept, right? And you know, we actually have the tools to do it now, and the urgency to do it now. You know, one thing you said, Andy, that you made me think of was this notion. Daniel Schmachtenberger, his Consilience project, did one thing on the destruction of the epistemic commons, right? And to me, it was like, what is epistemic commons? I mean, but it's, you know, it's basically the shared space of what we all believe is true, right? I guess is the and how that's been destroyed really by social media, where, you know, conspiracy theories and alternative facts, and you know, we can't fix that, right? But what we can do is create our own serious and significant epistemic commons that's actually a better competitor in that space. That, like, if, you know, I just think about how the paucity of, you know, trusted corporate media, even CNN, which used to be this kind of neutral thing, and, you know, can't, you know, is way beyond, you know, saving. And so, but I think that's one thing that you need to have scale in order to get to be a source of media or source of ideas or source of attention that's significant. But I think that actually, you know, we have, when I talk about our cohort, it does have scale. It's just a matter of how do we organize around it. Arti.
Hi, Brad. So good to see you. And I think everything that you spoke, I was literally making notes.
Oh, good. I'm happy to share the deck too.
And this is so that I don't lose, you know, things that I'm trying to integrate from what I'm learning and exchanging with people on this forum. And when I think about, and I'm actually reflective after everything that I saw. So when we think of superorganism, and I'm going to go a little on the dark side, because I'm also thinking of superorganism in the context of terrorism, terroristic groups. Mm-hmm. I'm looking at superorganism in the context of mobs that we find on the streets sometimes suddenly. I'm looking at, you know, cybercrime. I'm looking at the absence of positive example collectives. And I'm looking at that superorganism also. You know, and somewhere I'm searching for an application to understand that and find solutions that I can infuse into, you know, my areas of human operation that I come in contact with. For example, education. For example, if I end up working with an NGO that's looking to restructure itself at some point. So for me, I think an integration of 𝐂𝐴𝐻𝐿𝐴 and what you're talking about gives me a platform to make that happen. And I think the more number of people across the globe get onto a platform like this, They have a project management tool, they have a communication tool that's all integrated into one, and they are just equipped. I think that's the long and short of what we're talking about here today for the next 22 hours of how we can equip ourselves to equip one another to actually solve problems, the wicked problems.
Yeah. Yeah, and absolutely. And there's a lot of great work being done. I think the key is to interoperate. I mean, I work with a lot of different people, high-low, holochain. There's lots of, and ₂ has to be careful about the risk of being yet another one of those. So I think that's the key, is to not reinvent wheels and to be able to interoperate. That's part of the vision of a shared social graph, is that that's one way to interoperate, is to share the users, right? And then you can have simple apps that do, like, everybody's using Discord now in general, not everybody, but Slack, Discord, Mattermost. I mean, but there's kind of getting to be best practices on those. I think that's a lot of what we have to learn. One key thing, I think, when you talk about the dark side, I think one of the things that excites me is the idea that we can, that question of what is the third attractor? I mean, I think I'm really interested in, like, let's describe it. Let's actually describe this future we think we can be aiming for. And I have not seen that, right? I mean, we all have a general idea for it. Another quick example of the, when Tim was asking about how can this manifest in reality, one of the ideas I really like is the idea of a wiki budget, where we could all just say, okay, what can be done this year with, if we had enough money, what are all the things that we have enough people and resources and knowledge to do this year? As if we were the US government does it, right? They say, we're going to give this amount of money to these people to do this, right? What would we do if we had all the money in the world? What will we do to regenerate this year? What's our budget for this year for regenerating the planet? And I think that's something that, if you did it, it could be done collectively, and it would be a marker for, oh, hey, this is what this is about. Let's, I mean, and learn from that and build on it. Absolutely. Well, anyway, I'm not sure what the time is here. Oh, in a few minutes, but yeah, I will share the deck with you, Robert, and then you can pass it on. And thank you, everybody. And Tim, you have something?
Yeah. I just wanted to say, I don't know if it's possible if you can stick around for another hour, Brad.
Sure. Yeah. Cool. I think I can.
Everybody, obviously. Happy because next hour we have. We're going to be talking about economic democracy. We're going to look at a few practical systems, and also for governance.
Great.
And maybe also talk a little bit about the altruistic world, which is kind of an idea that you were leaning into there. So just want to grab you before we have to round off.
And Charles, Charles, if you're there and want to say anything quickly, you're welcome. Charles is one of my primary collaborators.
Thanks. I'm just glad to be here. I have nothing constructive to add, but you did great, and just glad at all the sort of energy around synergies and rock on Connectathon.
Yeah, and thanks for making this happen, Charles and Tim. But yeah, looking forward to the next hour.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Brad. It was fantastic. Thanks everyone for joining this hour. And yeah, please take a few minutes if you want to have a short pause and some refreshments. And for the next hour, we will pass the torch over to Tim, like he announced, talking about regenerative economies and much more.